and welcome to my channel, Haylee Marie Vintage. Today, we are headed to the Washington Ren Faire. It's around like Sonoma-ish, Monroe area. That's where we're headed today. I'm gonna take you along, show you some footage of what I saw there, and then just kind of talk about the event as a whole and my thoughts on it as someone who's never been to the Ren Faire as an adult, and somebody who has sensory issues as well as other disabilities that can make things like that kind of more challenging for me, and also bring some financial transparency of how much things cost and how expensive of an event it was to be at. So that's kind of the summary of what this video is going to be about. It's a lot of thoughts, a lot of opinions. Feel free to disagree with me. Just be nice about it. And with that, let's just go ahead and jump straight into the footage. Once we got there, we waited in line for it to open and enjoyed the bagpipes and the beautiful scenery. After getting into the fair, we found this fine dragon. So cute, so friendly. My cat, dragon, would be very overwhelmed in this situation. So very impressive. Go little dragon. So sweet, so cute. I love cats. And we gave him a tip for his fierceness. Our next stop while wandering around was archery. We happened to wander by. It was $10 to shoot 5 arrows. I could not do it because I have a shoulder and wrist injury right now, but I was very jealous of my friends who got to shoot some arrows. And both of them are pretty good. I think 4 out of the 5 made it onto the target. We then wandered around for a bit before settling at the stands. While we were waiting for this show to start, we did see the end of one of the tournament shows, which quite frankly aren't quite my vibe. We caught like the end of a bunch of people trying to sword kill a cabbage and then they lit it on fire. It was very confusing. That is just in general not my type of show. However, I do know a lot of people who really love that show. So if you haven't ever seen anything like it before, definitely see how you feel about it. For us, we were just trying to make sure we caught this show, which this is Equestrian Chaos. It is a horse and archery show, which seemed really fun. I love seeing kind of really awesome skills like this. It was very impressive to see all the different things that they could do with their horses. I don't know, shooting a bow and arrow is hard. Riding a horse is also pretty challenging, like if you're actually a very good horse rider. So this show was very, very impressive. The youngest participant in this show is 17 years old, which is wild. And they also did some really interesting balancing archery tricks that were also really impressive. Overall, I thought the show was really great. They did say that they had to take the horses slow this show because it was too muddy and they have to be careful, of course. And I am always glad to hear them taking consideration for the animals and making decisions accordingly. So as a result, we watched this show, which I still thought the tricks were very impressive, but we plan to come back for their 3 o'clock show where hopefully the horses could go a bit faster because the mud was much drier. Even though they were going slowly, the tricks were impressive and the crowd was really fun, and we also just got to sit in the shade for a while, which was nice. After that, we went to wander around again for a while. We sat down in the shade, and then eventually we went and got our water filled at one of the mini water filling stations that were around. Honestly, a lot of the Ren Faire was just kind of wandering around, looking at vendors, seeing how people are dressed, and it was really enjoyable. It was just kind of like chill vibes, which I really appreciated. And we just kind of, wandered with the goal to make it to 3 o'clock. We did spend a lot of time sitting in the shade and recuperating in some of those big tents, drinking sugary drinks to hopefully have some sort of electrolytes. This was a vibe. It was really fun, and there were some really awesome costumes, and it was just honestly so much fun. I realized I never show you guys what I was wearing, so most of my thing I made myself. I have a top and bottom that I made for a set earlier this year. That's just like a 1940s peasant dress set. And then I have my Hocus Pocus corset on and a little mushroom headdress that I had picked up on Etsy a year ago or so, as well as some just fun little jewelry. And then the leather bustier I bought here, and I'll talk about that at the end of the video. We lasted to our goal of 3 o'clock to go back and watch Equestrian Chaos and see what the full speed show is about. Definitely could see the horses going faster and getting to do their thing a little bit more. But overall, the show is mostly the same. Again, still very impressive. The only difference was this really astounding trick where, again, 17 years old, the youngest girl rode the 2 horses standing with 1 leg on each, and they did different maneuvers. It was astounding and really, really cool. I've never really seen anything like it. Definitely, if they're back next year or if they're at your Ren Faire, I would rate Equestrian Chaos as a very high quality show. After that show, we then proceeded to make our exit. We had been there since 10 o'clock and we left at 4, and we had a really great time. It was the perfect amount of time for all of us. 6 hours was just long enough to enjoy a lot of things, but not so long that we got cranky. I had a great time and hope you enjoyed seeing this footage. All right, you've seen the footage. I have my list of things I want to talk about and my list of costs. So the first thing, the ticket to get into the Ren Faire was $42.80. Parking was free, so this is like the only cost technically you have to take on. You can bring your own food and water and not spend a single other cent besides that $42.80 to go to the Ren Faire. Of course, I spent more money than that there, but we'll get into that in a second. First, our arrival strategy. So we happened to go on the last day of the fair, which was also a sold out day. Because we knew we were going on a sold out day, I asked some of my friends for tips on going to Ren Faire on a sold out day, and most of them recommended you get there about a half hour before they open, just to avoid the traffic buildup that happens later. So that's what we did, and everything went really smoothly. We got into the parking lot really easily, and we had like 20 minutes or so to finish putting on our costumes and our garb. And then we only waited in line like a few minutes before the fair opened. Definitely, even though it was a sold out day, I didn't feel like the line to get into the fair was excessive. It moved really, really fast. They make sure that your swords or any weapons that you're bringing in are like zip tied or like made so you can't, draw your weapons. And then they do specify, which I didn't see on their site, but they did specify when we were there, you're supposed to bring in things that are factory sealed. So I did chug my water bottle before we went in. I would also say they weren't that thorough, so if you really wanted to bring in your own things, you could. You could definitely also bring in your own snacks. I brought in my usual go-to for something like a Ren Faire or an event like that is I like to have some like beef jerky sticks on me because they're a quick way to like figure out my protein, and I bring Cliff Bars. Cliff Bars is my like protein bar of choice to keep me tided over during hangry moments, and definitely prepare for hangry moments whenever you go to events like these. As far as the general vibe of the Ren Faire, it was super fun. I loved the people watching and seeing how everyone dressed. I will say most people at the Ren Faire were dressed up. You definitely kind of stick out at a Ren Faire if you aren't dressed up at all. Like the people walking around in like a t-shirt and jeans definitely like stuck out. Even if it's just as simple as like putting on kind of a fun hat and a bandana, it will help you blend in better, which is just, it is funny. I think this is one of the first places I've been that like you stick out more if you're dressed in jeans and a t-shirt than anything else. Seattle is very jeans, t-shirt, athletic wear, so it was kind of fun to go to an event where that was not the norm. Overall, there's also just a lot of people who are really into Ren Faire, and I think that's really cool. So you do see a lot of people kind of LARPing, which is live action role playing, and they kind of take on these characters and it like become them, and I think it's kind of fun. LARPing is something like I personally have never been actually interested in, but is something I think seems really fun and a great way as an adult to like maintain a sense of creativity and like your inner child. So I do admire it. I will say my only critique on LARPing is if we could gender people less, that would be wonderful. A lot of people who LARP get very into the my lord and lady, like there's a lot of gendering that I don't think needs to happen. All that said, I actually felt like the fair was pretty queer. I saw a lot of queer people out and about walking around, and on other like diversity, I will note like the fair is really white, but it's also hard to say how much of that is being in Washington. Washington as a state is also very white. I did see BIPOC people around and out and about, but do be aware that like it is a mostly white people space. I just feel like that's a helpful thing to know going in if you are not white. As far as accessibility, I was actually fairly impressed. So this comes with a few disclaimers. Everybody in my group can walk. We just are all more prone to like overheating and like just kind of getting like that kind of overwhelmed. Like for me personally, I have a ton of sensory issues, so events like this can be really, really hard for me. I'm pretty heat sensitive, and I can also just kind of have some chronic pain stuff going on, and I found this pretty easy to navigate around. However, I also like can walk. I feel like wheelchair accessibility must be really challenging at events like these. Everything was flat, but flat in a field is different than flat in pavement. So be aware this is an event that takes place in what is normally a field the rest of the year. And it is a lot of walking, or just like a lot of distance. We ended up walking almost 4 miles. So that is something to like note on the accessibility. accessibility. However, that said, I felt like they had a lot of water stations, which is like a first great tool in accessibility. Finding water was not hard or challenging, and refilling your water bottle was not too difficult. I will note the water station in the food area would get backed up and would get a line, but there were other water stations that were always open and usually less crowded than the one by the food stands. Also, I felt like there was a lot of shade and seating. There were 4, I think, big main tents that had seating in the shade, and then there were a couple other like hangout tents that I saw throughout. Like, I definitely felt like there were plenty of places to go sit and rest and be in the shade, which is really great because I'm used to events kind of like So Expo, where despite the fact that most people who go to that event are elderly, there is not a lot of places to just like sit and rest. So it was really great to see something that really helps with accessibility. I know my group needed those places multiple times to try to like stop the overheating process from happening. So we really utilized that, and I was actually fairly impressed with that. Kind of around like the amenities, there are a lot of ATMs because cash is king. Definitely I used cash for most of this, except for some of the big purchases I made later in the day. But in general, credit card readings there are finicky, and it can take a while and really slow you down and slow the vendors down. So be sure to carry cash or have your cash card so you can use an ATM. It's also important to have cash for performers, which I'll talk about later. They had porta potties, which is what I expected in an area like this. They had plenty of porta potties, like kind of throughout, so it was never too hard to find a bathroom. And despite it being the last weekend, I felt like the porta potties were actually pretty well maintained and cleaned, which I thought was really impressive because usually the last day of an event, the porta potties are terrible. And like, I definitely have, like porta potty event trauma from going to Warped Tour as a teenager. These porta potties were much better maintained and not the stuff of nightmares, so that's great. What I will note for a first timer, something you might not think about, is you are using a porta potty, so think about your outfit accordingly. So what most people in my group did is we wore shorts under everything, which I have to wear shorts under everything anyway because the chub rub is real. I will be bleeding like up and down my thighs if I don't wear a pair of shorts. But the other benefit of wearing that pair of shorts is you can hike your skirts and costume and get it all together and all around you and nowhere near anywhere on the porta potty before you even go in the porta potty, and then you can come back out and readjust yourself and, you know, not be arrested for indecent exposure. So just think a little bit about how you're going to maneuver an outfit around a porta potty when you put an outfit together. There was definitely like points in time that I stood outside the porta potties holding like multiple swords and pieces of costuming. So also like if you go in turns, you can also make costumes work that way. But definitely one thing that I thought about when I got ready for it was making sure that I could get in and out of a porta potty relatively efficiently. Food and beverages that you pay for is just kind of another topic. I was kind of startled at how truly expensive the food there was. The food there isn't any more expensive than I would say like your ballpark food or your state fair food or your like Elitch Gardens food. However, what I would say is these are definitely portioned even smaller than those. Like when you go to state fair and you buy a thing of nachos, usually it's so many nachos or fries or whatever that like multiple of you can split it. I bought some nachos here for $19.07, and it was this big and did not have like, it wasn't even like filled to the brim of that big. So I wasn't shocked by the prices so much I was by the portion for the price. So that's just something to be aware of. Next year I'll definitely bring even more snacks than I did this year, likely bringing some things like cheese potentially to just kind of make me like less reliable on the food. However, what I will say about the beverages is I overall felt like the beverages were significantly better priced. There were like beverage vendors around. We found one that we really liked within the vendor tents that I first bought a coffee in the morning for $7, which if you know Seattle, that is exactly what you would pay for a coffee. There was no sticker shock there. And then later I went back to that same booth when we were all sort of starting our like decline into being dehydrated and like not feeling great from the heat. I went back there and I bought 4 lemonades for $28.60. I don't think these prices are particularly egregious. I thought they were pretty reasonable and the drinks were really good. So I thought honestly beverages were pretty well priced. It was really the food that shocked me. The food wasn't good for how expensive it was. To be fair, I chose to eat nachos at Ren Faire and that was on me. In the future, when I go back, I'm gonna go in with a meat pie strategy. The meat pies looked significantly better even though though they were still really expensive. And I was kind of, again, surprised at how small the meat pies were for how much they cost. So yeah, biggest thing I was shocked there by was portion. And again, there were lots of places to sit and eat your food. It wasn't one of those situations, like I feel like at the state fair this happens too, where often you have to stand somewhere and eat your food because they only have a few spare tables here and there that you kind of have to fight over. So lots of places to sit and eat and enjoy your food. So that was great. So these Ren Fairs have a ton of different shows that are kind of a ton of different things. I personally find myself more drawn to the skill shows. So these are like the skilled horseback riding shows, or I would even like consider like a musician, like a skill show, or stuff that kind of is more circus oriented. Like in general, I don't really enjoy the comedy variety offered by places like this, just because in general, for you to be a comedian at a fair like this, you have to speak to a really broad audience, and broad comedy is just not really my thing. I am much more into very small niche bits of comedy. So I personally enjoyed going to the skill-based shows. They were really impressive. Oh, another show that I'm not that excited by, but I know other people are, is I don't find like the jousting and sword fighting show very exciting. It just kind of feels silly to me, and I know that they are skilled performers and all of that. It just I can't quite buy into the narrative enough to make that show worth it for me. But yeah, I really enjoyed the skills shows I saw. Biggest thing that I would note about the shows, so at least at the Washington Fair at the arena, there's a half that is everybody, and there's a half that is 21 and up. If you are over 21, go to the 21 and up side, even if you are not drinking. There was always more seating available there. At least this year, it was the shadier side as well, so you are out of the sun more, and you don't have to deal with the screeching children, which I think children absolutely should be at Ren Fairs. I think that is exactly the type of place children should be, but I really appreciated having a place to sit that was 21 and over. And as someone who was 21 and over, I did get 2 meads there, which was $30.11, which again, I don't feel like it was an egregious price for a drink. Again, I live in Seattle, so $15 for a drink is not ridiculous. It is a little expensive when you're talking about like something like mead versus like a cocktail, but I didn't think it was anything wild. We weren't gonna even go see what the 21 and over section was because we thought it was maybe like an exclusive like ticket holder thing, but I have friends luckily who are less anxious than me, so we checked it out and know that at least at the Washington one, you can go sit in a 21 and over section. So that was great. And then I mentioned the cash, making sure you have cash. Not only should you make sure you have cash, you should make sure you have some smaller bills to tip your performers. I don't know what their pay structures are like, but I am positive that they are not getting paid anywhere near what they should. So bring some money to tip your performers. I also know some of the tips for the performers at the Washington one go to the horses that they use for the jousting are rescues, so it goes to maintaining those horses, which is really important. And then we did also tip, for example, there was a little cat dressed like a dragon, and we did give that cat performer a tip. I guess that cat humans a tip. And then another thing that we tipped for was there was a leather booth that had like an interactive like stamp your own leather thing, and that is something that you should also probably tip for. So yeah, make sure you have just some small bills for tipping. And I guess I technically spent money on that. I tipped I think I tipped twice, and that came at $10 because I tipped $5 each time. Another thing I noticed before I get like into the vendors, vendors had something, like a lot of them had stuff out for trinket trading. Trinket trading seems to be a whole subculture at the Ren Fair that I'm very intrigued by, but I did not participate in. I think I want to read up more on it and figure out how to trinket trade and potentially do some trinket trading next year when I go. It seems fun, however, I am very socially awkward, so I don't know if it would actually be a nightmare for me because events like these are always really overwhelming for me socially anyway. So I don't know if trinket trading is even really a great idea. And speaking of like being socially overwhelmed, I ran into different subscribers at different points in the fair. All those interactions are always really, really fun. I love when you guys say hi to me. However, I'm incredibly awkward, so just know that going in. I feel like most of the interactions I did pretty great with, but usually when I get to the end and it's time for us both to continue on with our lives, I panic and I say something weird, and that is on me. If you walk away from an interaction with me thinking that was awkward, no, that it was probably 100% me. It was not you. I love it when you guys say hi to me. I'm just a socially weird person, which is why I need to see if I really think trinket trading is right for me. But last thing I'll talk about is the vendors. So my channel very much does focus on labor practices and talking about garment workers, and I did see a lot of garments there that I thought were concerning in their origin. I was seeing stuff priced between $20 and $30 that I don't think you could use ethical labor and make those items. So that is something that I don't know, to be aware of. Like, I definitely had the impression before I went to the Ren Faire that all of the vendors were going to be these artisans. And while I do feel like it was 50% artisans and 50% kind of, I would describe almost like a boutique where they buy things wholesale and then sell them to you. And I saw like just a lot of like poor quality, cheap goods in those types of booths. And specifically in the clothing booths, I was seeing things that were fast fashion and were absolutely made using unethical labor practices. So that's just something that surprised me, even though like retrospectively it shouldn't have surprised me. But yeah, just be aware. I like think intentionally about what you're buying when you go, because yeah, I did feel like there was a good amount of like kind of cheapish stuff that like isn't going to last or like is just not near the quality of like an artisan good. However, there were a lot of really talented artisans at the Ren Faire. Lots of really fantastic leather work, lots of really interesting chainmail and jewelry and things like that. And I also felt like I saw some really interesting like costuming pieces and things like that were all handmade. So there is handmade artisan quality stuff there. You just definitely have to be a more critically thinking consumer than maybe I thought. I just assumed that Ren Fairs were very exclusively artisan based, and they're definitely not. With that, I'll show you what I did pick up. I went to the Ren Faire very deliberate in what I planned to buy. I planned to allow myself to buy one leather good and one piece of jewelry. So I did buy a piece of jewelry there. It's this really gorgeous fern pendant. I'm sure I'll put a close-up somewhere. It's really gorgeous. I'll link the creator's Instagram. One thing that I also noticed about the vendors at the Ren Faire is they don't really seem to be online. Both places that I purchased from, I asked if they had an online shop and I was told no, but they have an Instagram that they occasionally keep up to date on. So I just thought that was really interesting. So like definitely, while you have to be critically thinking about what you buy at the Ren Faire, there are vendors that you're not going to find anywhere else, which is pretty neat. So yeah, I got this little fern pendant with a little moonstone in it. It was really pretty. I was pretty torn between whether I wanted to buy something like this, which this cost me $110.30, or something kind of more chainmail-y. I was looking for chainmail while at the Ren Faire, and I don't know if it was because I was on like the last week, like literal last day of the festival, and I know these vendors often like make their stuff for the year going into these Ren Fairs, and so obviously by the end they're kind of sold out. So like this vendor, she said she was down to her last pieces like that when we came through, and she had a ton more earlier on in the fair. So I guess that's potentially a tip if you're looking for really unique pieces. Being earlier in the fair schedule might not be a bad idea, because I did feel like I couldn't find quite the chainmail pace I was looking for. I had kind of a specific idea in mind, and I just didn't see any chainmail that fit that, so I ended up going with this really lovely necklace. But the other thing I bought, which I was really excited about, I have been looking for a piece like this online for like a year. It's nothing that exciting. It's a bustier, a leather bustier. It's really high quality, really well made, great craftsmanship, and most importantly with leather, you could tell that these pieces were like actually like designed for somebody with breasts. I have wanted a piece like this for a really long time, but what you can't tell online is the quality of the craftsmanship on the leather, or even the quality of the leather itself. There is plenty of leather out there that, while it is genuine leather, it is bad quality leather. And that is something I noticed at the Ren Faire, is it felt like about 50% of the leather booths were really high quality stuff, and about 50% were kind of more that like junky leather you kind of get when you're in like big tourist destinations that have like those big like vendor markets. There's like a type of leather at those that is like pretty cheap and doesn't last a long time, and I would say about 50% of the booths there were that quality of leather, but there were quite a few booths with a lot of really high quality leather, so that's what I purchased from. And from what I could tell, the booth that I specifically purchased from had quite a bit of like women involved in the leather craft, which is why I think they hands down had the best bustiers in the entire fair. This guy cost me $152.03, which I'm not mad about. I think for genuine leather, like really well made piece, that is absolutely an appropriate price. I've definitely been looking at stuff on like Etsy or just other other places that are even more expensive and that I couldn't feel and tell like how the cut is and how the quality of the craftsmanship was. So I was really excited to pick up this piece, and the women who helped me get into this piece were really, really wonderful, and it was fun talking to them. And I also feel like you can tell that they take a lot of pride in their work as artisans, because they very much talked me through the care of leather, which I own a lot of leather, so I was very familiar, but it's also like really important at a place like a Ren Faire where someone might make an impulse purchase like this, that they are educating the people buying from them. So I thought that was also like a really cool thing and a good indication of like a good artisan piece. But I think that wraps us up. Let me double check my notes. I had so much fun at the Ren Faire. The only thing that I would change is my food choice. Otherwise, yeah, it was a fantastic time, and despite the heat and the elements and all the things that I think make putting on an event like that really, really challenging, I think was really great. So definitely think it's worth going to as an adult. It's not just a thing for kids. I think it's a really, really great place again to like let out your inner child. And I just loved seeing people like dressed up and just living like their best fantasy life. I thought it was really, really cool. And I will go again for all the other things that I really enjoyed, but I think the number one reason I'll go again is just to see all the creativity that we saw there. It was just such a creative and fun place. But with that, I will wrap this up. If you enjoy, definitely subscribe and stick around. I have the Minnesota State Fair coming later. We have more vlog content ahead. And of course, comment down below. Tell me about your feelings on Ren Fairs. I'd love to hear it. Give this video a thumbs up. And I will see you next Friday at 8 a.m. Pacific time. Bye!